I stood at the edge of the pit where the Rakshasas had thrown me, the white fire still licking at my legs, cold and searing at the same time, piercing me like thousands of icy needles that instantly heated to a white-hot glow, leaving the sensation that my soul was melting and freezing all at once. The Lord of Hell had vanished, dissolving into the shadows that writhed like living things, slithering like black snakes, but his voice, deep as rolling thunder, filled with low vibrations that shook the air, echoed in my mind. You've seen only the first facet. I didn't know how much time had passed, minutes, hours, or centuries. Here, time flowed differently, stretching and contracting like the breath of some monstrous creature. The pit began to tremble, its walls shifting with a dull grinding sound, as if stones were rubbing against each other, revealing a new level of this endless nightmare. The ground beneath me cracked with a deafening snap, and I fell downward into darkness that reeked of rusty iron, rotting flesh, and something else, acrid, like the smell of burning rubber. The fall was long, and the wind whipping my face was filled with voices, whispers, screams, moans, as if millions of souls were trying to tell their stories at once, their words merging into a chaotic hum that sliced my ears like a knife. I landed on a hard surface, but it was slick, covered in something warm and wet that clung to my hands like tar. I ran my hand over it. It was blood, thick, almost black, with a metallic tang that rose into the air. It flowed from cracks in the ground, forming rivers that glowed with a dim red light, like veins pulsing beneath the skin of some giant beast. Above me stretched a vaulted ceiling studded with stalactites, long and sharp like fangs, dripping a black liquid that hissed as it fell, leaving smoking stains on the floor. The air was heavy, saturated with sulfur and decay, and every breath burned my throat as if I were swallowing molten ash. This wasn't just hell. This was its second facet, a place where those who held power, wealth, and the fates of millions in life, but turned them to evil, were punished. Here, influential figures of the 20th century, whose names blared in newspapers and radio waves while I was alive and after my death in 1950, were tormented. Their sins were heavier than mountains, and hell had crafted special punishments for them, forged from their own deeds. I moved forward, stepping through the blood that squelched underfoot, leaving sticky trails that stretched behind me like threads. Soon, I saw the first figure. It was Adolf Hitler, whose shadow fell over the world in the 30s and 40s, whose speeches I'd heard on the radio before my death. He knelt in the center of a circle of molten iron that hissed and smoked beneath him, burning his legs to the bones blackening and cracking, releasing acrid smoke. His arms were stretched upward, bound by chains to hooks hanging from the ceiling, and the chains jerked as if alive, stretching his body with the snap of tendons and the crunch of breaking joints. Above him circled creatures like Harpies from Greek myths, but with the faces of his camp victims, emaciated, with empty eyes glowing white like ghosts. Their hair billowed like black seaweed, and their claws, long and curved like sickles, tore chunks of flesh from him that regrew instantly, oozing red sludge. He noticed me and rasped, his voice weak, laced with smoke. "You're here too? Help me." I shook my head, and one of the Harpies screamed in German, "You don't deserve help," and plunged her claws into his chest, ripping out a piece that fell into a puddle of blood with a splash. A demon with bull-like horns and skin covered in oozing sores approached and poured molten lead over his head, the lead hissing as it ran down his face, burning out his eyes, which regrew immediately, cloudy and bloodshot. "You wanted Iron Order. Here it is," the demon roared, and Hitler choked on a scream, smoke pouring from his mouth like a chimney. I turned away and moved on, the blood squelching underfoot, the air growing thicker, saturated with the smell of charred meat. Ahead was Joseph Stalin, whose camps and purges claimed millions of lives, whose portraits hung everywhere when I was alive. He lay on a massive wheel that slowly turned over a pit filled with snakes, their eyes burning like those of the Egyptian Apophis, their scales gleaming red, venom dripping from their fangs, hissing on the ground. The wheel was studded with long, rusty spikes that pierced his body, tearing his skin, breaking his bones with a crunch that echoed in the void. The snakes rose from the pit, writhing, and bit him, injecting venom that made his flesh bubble and burst, releasing black ooze that dripped below. His mustache burned, but didn't consume, the smoke rising to form the faces of those he sent to their deaths. Peasants, soldiers, poets, their eyes staring with silent reproach. He saw me and rasped, his voice low with a Georgian accent. "Who are you?" "Tell them I'm not guilty." I replied, "You condemned yourself." A demon with a skull-like face and empty eye sockets struck him with a whip made of human sinew, the wound smoking like acid. "You built an empire of fear. Now live in it." The demon thundered and Stalin writhed, but the chains held him fast. Nearby was Mao Zedong, whose cultural revolution drowned China in blood after my death. He was hung by his feet over a cauldron, not of boiling water, but of molten bronze that hissed and smoked, releasing steam that smelled of metal and rot, burning my face even from a distance. They lowered him down, and the bronze seared his face, hands, and chest until he turned black as coal, his skin cracking, exposing smoking muscles. But he was remade instantly, the torment restarting. Around him circled the shadows of peasants who starved under his rule, their bony hands reaching for him, scratching his skin with nails that left long, bloody streaks oozing black blood. He looked at me and forced out through the pain, "I saved the people. Tell them." I replied, "Your people are here. Look at them." The shadows screamed louder, and a demon with a bull's head and hooves that smoked on the ground lashed him with a whip of barbed wire, each strike tearing chunks of flesh that fell into the cauldron with a splash. "You wanted to reforge the world. Now they reforge you," the demon mocked, and Mount choked on the bronze steam, his scream dissolving into the hum. I moved on and saw Albert Fish, the American serial killer whose crimes in the 20s and 30s shocked even my era. He was crucified on a cross of rusty iron that creaked under his weight, the metal bending and cracking like old wood. Around him flew insects with stingers like wasps, but the size of fists, their wings buzzing like motors, their stingers gleaming like needles. They stung him, injecting venom that made his body swell and burst, releasing black ooze that dripped down, forming puddles that reeked of rot. His eyes were burned out, but he could still see the children whose ghosts stood around him, their faces pale with dark circles under their eyes, whispering his name with hatred. He turned his head to me and rasped, "I didn't want it was stronger than me." I replied, "Your victims didn't choose." A demon with a face covered in scales that peeled like a snake's skin sliced his body with a dull knife, slowly, savoring each cut, blood flowing in streams, and Fish howled but couldn't die. "You loved others' pain. Now love yours," the demon hissed, and the insects stung harder, their buzzing drowning out his cries. Then there was Pol Pot, leader of Cambodia's Khmer Rouge, whose killing fields became a grave for millions in the 70s. He was forced to crawl across a plain of searing ash that burned his hands and knees, leaving smoking burns that stank of charred flesh, his skin peeling off in flakes like embers. Above him hung a cage where crows with coal-like eyes sat, their feathers black but gleaming red, pecking at his back, tearing out chunks of flesh that regrew, oozing crimson sludge. The shadows of his victims, peasants, teachers, children, threw stones at him that hissed with heat, each strike breaking his bones with a crunch that echoed in the void. He lifted his head and rasped, "I was building paradise. Why am I here?" I replied, "Your paradise was their hell." A demon with goat-like horns and hooves that cracked the ground struck him with a chain studded with skulls that rattled with each blow, growling, "You wanted purity. Here it is, crawl in it." Pol Pot coughed ash that burst from his mouth like smoke. I saw Al Capone, though he was in the first Facet. Here, he was tormented differently. They bound him in thick, rusty chains that dug into his wrists and threw him into a pit where he was drowned in a river of molten gold, the gold he loved so much in life. The gold poured into his mouth, nose, and eyes, burning him from the inside, flowing down his throat, hissing and smoking, and he coughed, spitting out golden clumps that fell into the river with a splash, leaving ripples. His skin melted, dripping like wax, but it reformed, and demons with horse-like faces, their manes burning with blue flame, stabbed him with jagged-tipped spears, repeating, "You bought the world, now pay." He looked at me and rasped, "I was a king. Give me a chance." I replied, "Your throne is here." His screams drowned in the gurgling gold, and I saw his fingers claw at the pit's edge, but the chains pulled him deeper into the glowing river. Next was Ted Bundy, the serial killer of the 70s, whose charming mask hid a monster. He was tied to a pole that hummed with heat, and the shadows of the women he killed surrounded him, their hair writhing like black snakes, their eyes glowing white like ghosts. They tore at his body with nails, long and sharp as daggers, leaving deep wounds that bled black ooze that hissed on the ground. A demon with a distorted, mask-like face and empty eye sockets poured boiling tar down his throat, the tar smoking and bubbling, and Bundy writhed, trying to smile, but the tar burned his lips into black tatters. He rasped, "I was smarter than everyone, save me." I replied, "Your smarts brought you here." The shadows screamed louder, their voices merging into a howl, and the demon hissed, "You love their fear. Now feel yours," pouring more tar. I moved on and saw Leopold II, the Belgian king whose atrocities in the Congo in the early 20th century claimed millions of lives. He was bound to a tree of molten iron that hissed and smoked, its branches piercing his body like thorns, impaling him through. The shadows of Africans whose hands he ordered severed surrounded him, their skin black as night, their eyes burning red. They whipped him with thorned lashes that left smoking wounds and poured boiling rubber on him, the rubber he extracted with their blood. He shouted to me, "I was a king. I had the right." I replied, "Your right means nothing here." A demon with a scarred face carved a crowned symbol into his chest with a dull blade, and Leopold howled as the rubber filled the wounds. Nearby was Hideki Tojo, Japan's wartime general and prime minister, whose orders led to millions of deaths. He was sewn into a rough leather sack filled with scorpions, their stingers glowing blue, stinging him and injecting venom that made his body shake and swell. The sack hung over a pit where blue fire burned, licking at him from below, searing his skin to the bone. He rasped, "I served the emperor. It was duty." I replied, "Your duty brought you here." A demon with deer-like horns struck him with a chain, and the scorpions stung harder, their venom pooling on the floor like a river. The pit began to narrow, the walls trembling, releasing steam that smelled of sulfur and blood, and the ground split open again. I fell, and the Lord of Hell's voice thundered, "This is only the second facet." I woke drenched in sweat, the taste of gold in my mouth. This is the second part of 5. Like and comment if you want me to reach out to Hitler, Stalin, Bundy, or someone else and tell you what happens next. This is just the beginning of the depths.